Right. Do you guys all have the handout?
Yes. Yes.
All right. All right, cool. Thanks for inviting me, Boron. All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to try to undermine a wide class of arguments um, that I'll call save our intuition arguments for the existence of either coincident objects or four-dimensional objects. And I'll get more careful about what I mean by that in a minute, but quickly, by coincident objects, I just mean if you think the statue and the lump of clay are distinct objects, distinct three-dimensional objects. And by a four-dimensional object, I mean an object that's spread out in time. What I want to do is the way these arguments work is you find a folk sentence and you're like, this is obviously true. And then you argue, like, in order for this to be true, these objects, coincident objects or four-dimensional objects, have to exist. So they do. Um, and what I want to do is respond to those arguments by developing what I think is a novel um, theory of reference that explains how the sentences can be true, even if the objects, coincident objects and four-dimensional objects don't exist. So another way to think of it is I'm going to be defending this view that I'll call 3D one-thingism, which is basically the view that there are no such things as coincident objects or four-dimensional objects, uh, and that every normal physical object is just a bare three-dimensional hunk of matter. All right, so that's the rough plan, and now let me just sort of go slowly through some definitions and set things up before I go. Okay, so four-dimensional object, I said a second ago, it's an object spread out in time. Here's a more precise definition. It's an object that's located at multiple times, and for each time it's located, it's got a temporal part that's located only at that time. And four-dimensionalism is the view that there are four-dimensional objects and that ordinary objects like statues and lumps of clay and tables and people are four-dimensional objects. So they're spread out in time, right? So JFK is like an object that's like 6 feet tall and 1 foot wide and 46 years long. Um, all right, so note on a standard statue lump case, four-dimensionalism entails that the statue and the lump are distinct objects, right? So here's a case. Let's say we've got a clay statue called Stachy, and the lump of clay that constituted is Lumpy. And let's suppose that Lumpy was created in a clay factory in 2010, and Stachy was formed into a statue in 2020. And when it was formed into a statue, the artist didn't like pull any clay off or add any clay. They just changed the shape of it. Um, So in that case, four-dimensionalism entails that Stachy and Lumpy are numerically distinct objects because they're different four-dimensional objects because Lumpy has temporal parts that Stachy doesn't have because Lumpy started existing in 2010 and Stachy didn't exist until 2020. All right. Now, you can also have a case where four-dimensionalism is going to say they're the same object, right? And so there's this famous Lumpel and Goliath case. Uh, where Lumpel and Goliath are created and destroyed at the same time. So they're the same four-dimensional hunk of matter. And in that kind of case, the standard four-dimensionalist view is they're just identical. So what four-dimensionalists think is that at any given time, if two, like in the Stachy Lumpy case, right now, the right now temporal part of Stachy and the right now temporal part of Lumpy are identical. So there's only one three-dimensional object there, but it's a temporal part of multiple four-dimensional objects. All right. Next view. Okay, so here's a definition. Two objects are coincident just in case they're numerically distinct and they have the exact same location and they're made of the same matter or they have the same parts. So, um, and multi-thingism is the view that there are coincident objects and ordinary objects like um, statues and tables and people are coincident with other objects, most notably the hunks of matter that constitute them. All right. So, according to four dimensionalism, um, Stachy and Lumpy are not coincident because they don't have the same location because Lumpy is located in some times that Stachy isn't located in. But both views entail that Lumpy and Stachy are numerically distinct objects, that as we look at Lumpy and Stachy, there's more than one thing there. Okay. And then the view that opposes both of them that I'm going to be defending, not arguing for, but defending is 3D one thingism. And that's the view that there are no such things as coincident objects or four-dimensional objects. And every ordinary object is just identical to a three-dimensional hunk of matter. And those objects are not coincident with any other objects, and they're not spread out in time, right? So if we use I'm going to use this term, the SL hunk, to denote the hunk of matter that constitutes Lumpy and Stachy. So 3D one thingism entails that Lumpy and Stachy are both numerically identical to the SL hunk. Um, so they're numerically identical to each other. So there's only one object there, which is why I call it one thingism. All right. So now here are the way these the arguments that I'm going to be talking about, I'll call them save our intuition arguments. And they work by giving us some sentences and going, look, these are true. And they seem to, their truth entails the existence of coincident objects or four-dimensional objects. Because basically what they're all trying to do is entail that Lumpy and Stachy are different objects. Okay, so I'm just going to give you two examples here. Um, uh, First example, E1 and E2 at the bottom of the first page of the handout. Lumpy existed in 2012. Stachy didn't exist in 2012. Those both seem true. And it seems they together entail that Lumpy and Stachy have different properties. So it looks like they entail that Lumpy and Stachy are numerically distinct. And so it looks like, oh, there's got to be coincident objects or four-dimensional objects. And likewise, there's the modal case. Lumpy could survive being squashed into a ball. Stachy couldn't survive being squashed into a ball. So they have different modal properties. So again, they're distinct. All right. So what I want to try to do is undermine these kinds of arguments by giving a semantic theory or a theory of reference in particular that explains how sentences like this could be true, even if Lumpy and Stachy are numerically identical and 3D one thingism is true. And there are no such things as coincident objects or four-dimensional objects. All right. And by the way, I should say, let me put it this way. I don't think the 3D one thinger actually needs a semantic theory like this because I think I'd be happy to just endorse an error theory. If I got convinced that these sentences really do commit to multiple objects, I'd just be like, oh, okay, then they're not true. As long as you can tell a story about why the sentences are useful and why like we get along with them, I'm happy to be an error theorist. But I think there's a plausible theory of folk discourse that makes them come out true, even if the objects aren't there. So I'm trying to see if I can make a case for this, even though I don't think I need to as a 3D one thinger. All right. All right. So before I say what my theory is, I just want to put some opposing theories on the table so that we have them for comparison. And basically, what I'm just telling you is what I think the standard multi-thinger will say about reference and what the standard four-dimensionalist will say. So here's what I call the multi-thingist theory of reference. The idea is that we use ordinary names like Stachy and Lumpy and whatever, Obama and Mars, just normal names, to denote objects that have certain properties essentially, right? So we use lumpy to pick out an object that has the property lump of clay or being a lump of clay essentially. And the name will keep referring to that object as long as it exists. And we use Stachy to pick out an object, a different object, an object that has its shape property essentially. And that name will keep referring to that object as long as it exists. And like Obama, we use that to pick out an object that has the property being a human being, essentially, or something like that. All right. Here's a four-dimensionalist theory of reference. We use these names to pick out four-dimensional objects whose temporal parts are related by certain kinds of continuity relations. So we use lumpy to pick out a four-dimensional object whose temporal parts are connected by the lump of clay continuity relation. So each time slice of lumpy, so lumpy is a four-dimensional object, but each three-dimensional time slice has the property being a lump of clay, and the next time slice is lump of clay continuity related to the previous one. And we use Stachy to pick out a four-dimensional object whose temporal parts are connected by a shape continuity relation. And we use Obama to pick out a four-dimensional object whose temporal parts are connected by the human being continuity relation, and so on. Okay. And then there's this theory, stage theory. This is Ted Sider's view that we use these names to pick out the three-dimensional slices of four-dimensional objects that are connected by those continuity relations. Um, okay, so there's just sort of the three most obvious theories that you might endorse if you endorse multi-thingism or four-dimensionalism. Um, you might endorse other theories, but here's the point I want to make. All three of these theories use properties to explain how the reference of a term gets fixed and how these names refer across time. Um, and it's hard to see, so a four-dimensionalist might endorse some other theory or a multi-thinger, but it's hard to see how they could avoid this because all of these views have the following. They all say the following thing. When the artist points at Stachy and Lumpy and says, I dub these Stachy, all of these views think the artist is pointing at many objects. And so there needs to be some mechanism that latches the name onto the unique referent. And it's hard to see how this could be done without appealing to properties, because they all think there's like a bunch of objects there. All right. Now you might be thinking, oh, this is bad news because this is going to make them be committed to like a description theory. I don't think that's right. I think these views are all compatible with direct reference theory and the rigidity of names. I'm not going to bother to explain why because the same worry is going to arise with my theory, and I'm going to explain why my theory is compatible with direct reference theory and rigidity. And I think what I say, like these people could say too, but since I don't endorse these theories, I'm not going to get into that. All right. So now we come to my theory. So I'm going to call this theory names follow properties, or for short, NFP. And you're going to see why I call it that in a minute. Um, I just want to walk you slowly through the theory, and I've broken it up into parts. Okay, so here's part one. We use ordinary names like Stachy and Lumpy and Obama and so on to refer to bare three-dimensional hunks of matter. Um, so on this view, Stachy and Lumpy are co-referential. They both just refer to the SL hunk. Um, part two, every ordinary name is associated with a property and what I'm going to call a keep referring property. And this is basically a property that the object needs to have, any object needs to have to be the referent of the name, and it needs to keep having that property to keep being the referent. Um, so um, the keep referring property associated with lumpy is just being a lump of clay. And the keep referring property associated with Stachy is like a shape property or shape and statue or something like that. So if we squash the SL hunk into a ball, Stachy will stop referring to it and hunk and lumpy won't stop referring to it because it lost the keep referring property associated with Stachy, but not with lumpy. Okay. All right, part three. And this is sort of the heart of the theory. So here's the idea. So names refer to these bare three-dimensional hunks of matter, but they don't keep referring to the same hunk of matter for very long. Instead, as time goes on, they keep switching and referring to different hunks of matter. And they do that according to this rule that I call reference rule that's on page 2 of the handout indented. And basically it says this. Suppose we've got a name N, and N refers at T, so we're at time T1, and N is referring to a hunk of matter H1. And the keep referring property associated with N is F. So now imagine that at time T2, H1 stops having the property F. and a slightly different nearby property or hunk of matter, H2, starts having F, and H2 is F, it both H2 has the property F, but it's also F continuity related to H1. Then the reference rule says that at T2, N stops referring to H1 and starts referring to H2. So example, I've got this lump of clay. Its name is lumpy. I like rub my finger on it and knock a few particles off of it. So now the hunk of matter that's got the property being a lump of clay is no longer the original hunk because it lost some of its matter. It's a new hunk of matter. Reference rule says, okay, then lumpy stops referring to the original hunk of matter and starts referring to the new hunk of matter that has the property lump of clay. All right, so this is why I call the theory names follow properties. The idea is that um, as the property sort of drifts along, being had by different hunks of matter. And as it does, it drags the name with it, right? So, like Obama, when he was a baby, the name Obama attached to him. And as time goes on, like the thing that has the property being a human being drifts to different hunks of matter, and the name Obama goes with the property. So the name doesn't refer to the property, it refers to the hunks of matter that have the property, but it follows the property around and refers to the new hunks of matter. Okay. And it's not because there's like some magical, like the property is like a reference magnet, but it's not like there's some magical connection between the property and the name. It's just this happens because of convention, because that's how we're not aware of it until this paper, but it's built into our conventions unbeknownst to us is the idea. All right. Part five. This is the last thing, and it has to do with past and future tense sentences. And the idea is that if I say, well, let me just give an example, a past tense sentence. So I say, Lumpy was in my dining room yesterday. Um, the truth condition of that sentence is not that the current referent of Lumpy was in my dining room yesterday. The truth condition is rather that go back in time and find the yesterday lump, right? So the truth condition is there was a referent of Lumpy yesterday, and that thing was in my dining room. And likewise for future sentences, and likewise, as we're going to see later, for modal sentences, but I'll leave that alone. So that's basically the idea that like our past and future discourse about these things tracks what was the referent and will be the referent in the future, not latching onto the current referent. Okay. And obviously that has to be part of the theory because otherwise this hunk of matter, like as the hunk of matter changes, like we're sticking with the name, not the current referent. Okay. All right. Let me just say a couple of things about this theory, and in particular about the way that it uses properties, because this could, if you're a fan of direct reference and rigidity, which most of us are, you might have alarm bells going off. So let me explain how this theory is compatible with that. So here's the first point to note. This is not a version of the description theory. There's a couple ways to see that. The most obvious thing is this. The keep referring property associated with basically every name of a person is the same keep referring property, just namely being a human being, right? So the keep referring property associated with Obama and the one associated with Trump are both just being a human being. So this is not the kind of description theory that like uniquely picks out the reference of a name. That's not what's happening. Second point is that the theory is perfectly compatible with direct reference theory because it's compatible with the idea that the referent is the thing that gets contributed to the proposition expressed by the sentence using the name, and that the keep referring property doesn't go into the proposition. That's just the keep referring property is about getting the reference right, but it doesn't go into the proposition, right? And so in a way, this is like you can think of this like Kaplan's characters, right? Like Kaplan thinks that indexicals have characters, but they don't go into the proposition expressed. Um, Only the referent does. So it's like that. So that's one point. Here's another thing I want to say. Yeah, I'm appealing to properties here, but all of the opposing theories do too. And I'm appealing to properties in a metaphysically innocent way compared to them, right? So all I need, in order for an object to be a referent of lumpy, it just needs to have the property being a lump of clay. But the multi-thinger thinks, oh, it needs to have it essentially. And the four-dimensionalist thinks there needs to be a four-dimensional object whose temporal parts are connected by the property or the continuity relation that uses the property. So since all I'm asking is that the referent have the property, it's like metaphysically innocent compared to the opposing views. Okay. Um, all right, that's enough on that. So here's what I want to do now. I want to explain how um, this theory makes the relevant sentences come out true. And by that, I mean the sentences in these save our intuition arguments. So the sentences that lead people to think that we should believe that lumpy and stachy are distinct objects. If this theory is true, the theory NFP, the semantic theory, if it's true, it'll explain how these sentences are true, even if there are no coincident objects or four-dimensional objects. All right. So I'll start with the one I said before, E1 and E2. Lumpy existed in 2012 and stachy didn't exist in 2012. Uh, so if NFP is true, what this says is, or I don't know, says the truth conditions are that there was a referent of lumpy in 2012 and there wasn't a referent of stachy in 2012, and those are both true. According to NFP, there was no referent of stachy in 2012 because of the way the theory is set up. So it just straightforwardly gives us that result. Um, okay, next, you might be like, okay, you told us how to do past tense sentences, but we can get the same result with a present tense sentence, right? So look at these two sentences, O1 and O2. These are present tense sentences. Lumpy is more than 12 years old. Stachy is not more than 12 years old. So yeah, those are present tense, but it seems like there's something like tense built into the predicate, more than 12 years old. And it feels like um, everyone forget the statue lump problem or any of the stuff we're talking about. If you say that like Johnny is more than 12 years old, presumably you don't think there's some like inherent more than 12-year-old oldness in him. What you think that sentence is doing is talking about the past. Like Johnny existed more than 12 years ago. And as soon as you see that that's what the normal person should say about these sentences, you're like, oh, it's obvious what NFP says about this. There was a referent of lumpy more than 12 years ago, and there wasn't a referent of stachy more than 12 years ago. So I think that the theory handles those as well. Um, Okay, now the modal sentences. Lumpy could survive being rolled into a ball, and stachy couldn't. And now we can say roughly the same thing. We just go, the truth condition of S1 is just there could have been a referent of lumpy that survived being rolled into a ball. And S2 says there couldn't have been a referent of stachy that had been rolled into a ball. And both of those are true. And this can be this can be connected to any view of modal discourse you like. So if you like the possible worlds analysis, the view is going to be that there's no possible world where a referent of lumpy, our word lumpy, has survived being rolled into a ball. Sorry, there is a world like that. And S2 says there's no world where a referent of stachy has survived being rolled into a ball. And both of those are true. Or you could do it by taking the modal term as a like taking possible as a primitive. Either way, it'll work. And I think it's the same thing that works in the past and future case works in the modal case. You just stick with the um, you just basically switch the name out for a reference of that name, and then you get the right answer. All right. Next, you might go, okay, all of these sentences are using names, and you've given us a theory of names, but we can get an argument for the idea that lumpy and stachy are numerically distinct without using names, right? By using quantified sentences. So this is near the bottom of page 3 of the handout, these sentences Q1 and Q2. Um, Q1 is there is an object X that's constituted by the SL hunk that existed in 2012. And Q2 says there's an object X constituted by the SL hunk that didn't exist in 2012. And intuitively, they both seem true. And this seems to entail that there are two different objects constituted by the SL hunk. Um, okay, so I think I can respond to this in basically the same way that Lewis responds to the corresponding objection to his view, right? So Lewis is a four-dimensionalist, and so he thinks that in most statue lump cases, the statue and the lump of clay are numerically distinct. But in the famous case where Lumpel and Goliath were created together and destroyed together, Lewis says like they're numerically identical. It's just one four-dimensional hunk of matter. But then we still have these sentences. Lumpel could survive being rolled into a ball and Goliath couldn't. They both seem true. And Lewis tells a story about counterpart relations, right? Like, and you guys all know this, I'm sure, but uh, look could survive being rolled into a ball is context sensitive. Uh, it, um, it, in order for the sentence to be true, there's got to be an object and a counterpart of Lumpel and Goliath that has survived rolling into a ball. But what kind of counterpart? That depends on context. There's a lump of clay counterpart that's been rolled into a ball, but there's no statue counterpart that's been rolled into a ball. So if you use the word Lumpel, you're sort of signaling one context. Think of this as the lump of clay, and now there is a counterpart. If you use the word Goliath, you're signaling you're talking about the statue. So we're worried about the statue counterpart relation, and there is no statue counterpart that's been rolled into a ball. And so they're both true. And then we get to the quantified sentences, and Lewis is like, look, they're true in different contexts. One, you get to one by existentially quantifying on the sentence about Lumpel. You get to the other by existentially quantifying on the sentence about Goliath. And so they're both true, but they're just true in different contexts. And so there's no contradiction. And what I can just do the same thing here. Q1 is an existential quantification on E1, and Q2 is an existential quantification on E2. And so they're true in different contexts, and there's no contradiction. If you just basically, it's the different contexts are like whether we're thinking of this thing as a lump of clay or a statue. All right. So basically, I'm just stealing the Lewis maneuver here. All right. Next, suppose we roll the SL hunk into a ball, and then somebody says statue doesn't exist anymore. And you might be like, that seems true, but how are you going to say that's true? Like nothing disappeared. We rolled it into a wall. The things that's still there, statue's still there. But of course, NFP tells us how to get out of this. NFP says when it was rolled into a wall, statue stopped referring. So statue is now, after this thing has been rolled into a ball, statue is just a vacuous term. It refers to nothing. Um, and oh, I forgot to say, I think I skipped one of the parts of the theory that um, so the name follows the property, but um, to the next hunk of matter that is continuity related. But if no hunk of matter is continuity related in the right way to the previous one, then the name stops referring, right? So when we squash statue, the SL hunk into a ball, there's no new hunk of matter that has the shape property. So statue just stops referring. Um, okay, so at this point, once it's been rolled into a ball, statue is a vacuous term. So this sentence is just like Pegasus doesn't exist. And then, right, there's a puzzle about how to say that's true, right? Like Plato's beard or whatever, but whatever whatever you like to say about Pegasus doesn't exist, then this person, the the person who likes 3D one-thingism and NFP can say the same theory about statue doesn't exist. All right. Um, next sentence. This is a sentence that Jack Spencer suggested to me. So Lumpy is older than statue. And we go, look, that looks true. Lumpy was born in 2010, statue was born in 2012. But if a 3D one thinger says that, and you, you think that Lumpy and Stachy are identical, it looks like you have to say that the older than relation is not irreflexive. And that looks super counterintuitive because it seems like older than is irreflexive. Um, so here's what I think I want to say to this. I want to bite this bullet and explain why it's not so bad. So I think what I want to say is like, oh yeah, we just discovered that older than is not irreflexive, but note the following bunch of points to make this palatable. First, the only exceptions to the irreflexivity of older than are weird statue lump cases. And so it's no wonder we have the intuition that older than is irreflexive because the only exceptions to that are in these weird cases that only a philosopher would think of. So that's one point. Second point is, look, everyone in the game is forced to do this kind of thing by the statue lump case, right? The multi-thinger has to do the same thing. Like, here's an intuition. You can't have two things in the same place at the same time. That seems right. And they have to go, yeah, turns out that intuition is wrong. Uh, but don't worry, it's no wonder we have that intuition because the only exceptions to that are in these weird cases that only a philosopher would think of. Right. So everybody has to give up something because of statue lump. Um, okay, that's one point. Here's another thing I want to say is like there are nearby there are nearby principles that are true that are can sort of go proxy for the irreflexivity of older than. And maybe you think these just are irreflexive principles or something. But here, I'm going to give you two, one for names and one for objects. So here's one for names. If A and B are names, and if they're associated with the same keep referring property, then if the sentence A is older than B is true, then the sentence A is not identical to B is also true. All right, so that's a kind of irreflexivity. Here's another one for objects. Take any two objects, X and Y, and calculate their ages using the same continuity relation, like the F continuity relation. Then it follows that if X is older than Y, then X is not identical to Y. So in a way, you can think of those as like restricted irreflexivity principles. Okay, next. Okay, this is sort of change of topic. Um, to show how this theory does another cool thing that's not sort of statue lump related. So look, 3D one thingism entails presentism. So it's a version of presentism. So sooner or later, the 3D one thinger is going to have to respond to all of the objections to presentism, right? The special relativity objection, the truth maker objection. I'm obviously not going to talk about all that stuff here. I'm just trying to deal with the statue lump stuff. Um, But I want to show you that this theory solves one of the problems for presentists. And one of the famous problems for presentism is sort of like a singular proposition worry. Like, take a sentence like Aristotle used to exist. It seems like Aristotle's a component of the proposition expressed. Um, this is a straightforward sentence about Aristotle. So Aristotle has to exist to even say this, let alone for it to be true. Um, but my theory explains how to get out of that. Like the truth condition of this is that there was a referent of Aristotle. And so it just turns it into a straightforward past tense claim where you're not latching onto something now, you're going back in time to get it. Right. Now, of course, the presentist still has to answer the truth making, like what makes this true. But that's a different puzzle, right? Like what makes past tense sentences true is a different puzzle than this singular proposition latch onto thing. And all I'm saying is this theory of reference I'm giving you gives the presentist a solution to that worry, not the truth making worry. My own view is that the presentist can solve the truth making worry and the special relativity worry. But I'm not going to talk about that here. All right, one more. I just want to show how this can solve other puzzles of coincidence, not just statue lump. And there's a whole bunch of puzzles. I'm just going to talk about one, the Tibbles-Tib case. All right, so Tibbles is a cat at T1. It's a normal cat that has a tail. And Tib is a big part of Tibbles. Tib is all of Tibbles except for the tail. Okay. But then, unfortunately, Tibbles has her tail amputated so that at T2, Tibbles no longer has a tail. Okay, so now here are some sentences. T1, Tibbles was not identical to Tib at T1. That's true. Tib was a proper part of Tibbles. T2, Tib is the same thing now at T2 that it was at T1. That seems right. Nothing happened to Tib. The tail disappeared, but the tail was never part of Tib. But if we're a 3D one thinger, it seems like we have to say Tibbles is identical to Tib now. It's the same three-dimensional hunk of matter. But T1, T2, and T3 together form a contradiction, right? If if Tib is identical to Tib now, and Tib is identical to the previous Tib, and Tibbles is not identical to the previous Tib, we have a contradiction. Okay, assuming that identity is transitive. Okay. Well, I think my theory gives a solution to this, right? The solution has to do with the fact that Tibbles changed the name Tibbles changed its referent from T1 to T2. It refers to a different hunk of matter now than it used to. And in particular, I mean, we can go through all these sentences, but I'll just talk about T1. The right way to read T1 is that there was a reference of Tibbles at T1, and there was a reference of Tib at T1, and those two references were identical. And that's true. And you can just go through all the sentences and they all come out true, and there's no contradiction. Now, the worry might come back, wait a minute, but don't you also have to say that Tibbles is the same thing now? Like we want to intuitively want to say Tibbles is the same cat. Like if I clip my nails, I don't like become a different person, right? Because I cut off one of my parts. And likewise, Tibbles didn't become a different cat. Tibbles is the same cat now that she was before. Like the amputated tail shouldn't matter. That seems right. And it seems, and the worry is like this seems incompatible with like my view, the 3D one thingness view. But here's because I'm saying they're not the same thing. It keeps changing its reference. But here's the response is like, if this theory is true, you have to endorse, like, you have to get a theory for the whole language. So words like same and different are going to be in sync with the way names work, right? And so the word same, here's the view that the NFPer should say is the word same is ambiguous, right? If sometimes we use it to mean numerical identity, usually that's when we're doing same time identity claims, like Superman is Clark Kent. But when we're doing cross time identity claims, the word same is usually talking about a continuity relation. So if I say that Tibbles is the same thing now that it was then, what I'm basically saying is um, the prior reference of Tibbles was continuity related in the appropriate way, the cat way, to the current referent. And so this is true. Now, taking this line runs the NFPist into a different puzzle, namely cross-time reference. That's a puzzle for presentists, right? So here's a famous puzzle. How can we save the truth of Obama admires Gandhi if presentism is true? It's a present tense sentence with a relation to a past thing. My own view is that presentists should be error theorists about sentences that are directly about past objects. And so they should say that it's strictly speaking false that Obama admires Gandhi, but it's for all practical purposes true. This is a lot to say about this, but roughly the idea is that the sentence would have been true if eternalism had been true, and that makes it for all practical purposes true, despite the fact that it's strictly false, and the for all practical purposes truth makes it useful and harmless to talk this way. So roughly my view of T4 is that the truth condition is that um, Tibbles is cat continuity related to the former referent. So it's a cross-time relation sentence. So it's like the Obama sentence. So we should be error theorists about this and go, oh yeah, well, this would have been true if eternalism had been true. Because we're making straight reference to a past object. All right, but that's a different problem. All right. That's enough cases. The last thing I want to say is just to point out that the theory is compatible with rigidity. Um, there's many ways to think about rigidity. One way to think about it is in terms of counterpart relations. Names are rigid because The only objects in other worlds that are referents of our names are counterparts of the actual referent, right? And that way of thinking about it um, just lines up perfectly with the way I'm thinking of cross-time reference, right? So like in order for a future object to be a referent of lumpy, it's got to be lump of clay continuity related to the current referent, right? Not no, it's not the theory doesn't say any future object that has the property being a lump of clay is a referent of lumpy. It's got to be continuity related. And likewise for other worlds, like the theory doesn't say any object in another world that has the property being a lump of clay is a referent of lumpy. It's got to be a counterpart. So I think the theory actually just dovetails with the rigidity of names. All right, that's it.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much. No questions, comments.
Okay. So metaphysics, it's been a while for me, this kind of stuff. So some of these questions might be stupid. I'll start with one. Uh, we, you gave this Aristotle example about where's the reference to Aristotle?
Aristotle used to exist.
Yeah, Aristotle used to exist because there used to be this thing referred to as Aristotle. And I just so suppose we identify this proton, prote now,
Mhm.
uh, protons were no one was referring to protons in 1700, right? So there was no actual reference there, but the proton probably existed back then. I mean, weird to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sure you have an answer to this. So you know
Oh,
where
it's
I'm
a good,
going,
yeah.
right?
No, I
It's just
actually
a
have a
modal
quick.
claim. Like, had we been around and had the concept of protons, we would have referred to this thing at that time, and it
Yeah,
would have been correct.
yeah. I mean, I think
And
you
in
don't
virtue
agree.
of what would have been correct, though, if the reference is the thing that tells us whether the
Yeah.
identity is there, kind of.
Um, so good question. There's actually a footnote about this in the paper. I don't think you even need to switch to proton or prote because I think Aristotle works. I doubt they called him Aristotle. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they did. Um, uh,
But there was
here,
a thing, Aristotle, there. Like they recognized that. Whereas we didn't. No one
yeah,
knew about protons. Um,
yeah.
there's no one referring to anything that we identify.
Maybe I'm not. Let me answer it for Aristotle, and then if I'm missing, maybe I'm missing something worrying about protons that aren't for Aristotle. But I think what I'm going to say about Aristotle will work for protons. Um, the issue is whether our name, Aristotle, would have referred to. There was a thing that would have been a referent of our name, Aristotle. Um, Here's an important point to note. Um, in order for this view to work, you have to individuate names finely in the following way. And this is like a thing that Kaplan says in this paper, Words. Um, David Kaplan and David Lewis have different names. So new
Hmm.
each new baptismal event creates a new David name, right? So um, I'm talking about David Kaplan, and I say David wrote on the plurality of worlds. That's false, right? So it's important that I go, the sentence doesn't say there was a referent of David, and that referent wrote on the plurality of worlds. If that's all you said, and you individuated names coarsely so that the two Davids have the same name, it would come out true. But it's this specific name I'm using had a referent. Our name, this specific one. So we say Aristotle, this specific Aristotle name, our name would have had, so that object would have been a referent of our name is the way to put the theory carefully. So that I think solves the Aristotle case. Is there something worrying about protons that they didn't even know protons existed? Because what I want to say is like it's just all the thing is the object had to be there and our word would have referred to it.
No, I guess if the would have, if it's just a modal claim like that, uh,
Yeah, so you
I
put
think that I think that just that's the issue. I mean, I think that solves it. I probably, if I thought about it a little more, I might have another question about
Am I?
specifying the particular modal, the reference in those modal situations. But I don't have that question formulated, so I'll
No,
let someone ask a question, maybe.
I appreciate that you're like, oh wait, you just brought in a big gear that you didn't tell us about this. And I think I want to say it's just a normal counterfactual. That's the kind of modal is. It's just a straight up counterfactual. And it may be that the name is the one that they would have used, right? So if I just say, um, Justin went to the store yesterday, like in that case, like the name, so the counterfactual, it can be that the antecedent is true, but it just doesn't need to be true. But I think what I need is just a counterfactual.
Okay, if I may, let's go from the very beginning if I get things right. So there is this lump and we turn it into a sculpture. Okay. So what do you want to say that we are, when we are talking about the lump and the sculpture, that we are talking about the same thing, or that we are talking about the same property, or what?
My,
What is your claim?
so my claim is, and I'm not arguing for this here, I'm defending it. Lumpy and Stachy are one and the same object. There's just piles of matter. There aren't this explosion of weird metaphysical objects. All there is in the world is just hunks of matter. And then we come along and we talk about them and we give multiple names to the same hunk of matter by thinking of them in different ways. And um, we think of it in a certain way, and then that way, which is a property, gets attached to that name, right? So, like in normal cases, like when you just name a child is born, and we just go, "I'm naming this child Barack." Um, we're just everybody like we don't say it. We're thinking of this thing as a person, right? And so the Barack name is now going to follow around the hunk of matter. Um, and if the hunk of matter that is a person switches, the name goes with it. But there's not two different objects. And then, so in the statue lump case, we've got this statue name and we've got this lump of clay name. They're denoting the same thing, um, but they function differently because they're associated with these different properties. And the one name follows hunks of matter that have a shape, and the other one follows it that anything that has a lump of clay. It doesn't matter if it keeps the same shape. So if we roll it into a ball, the one statue name stops referring and lumpy keeps referring. And it's a way that the semantics sort of mimics heavy metaphysics without the heavy metaphysics. So, like, here's the theory: names co-refer in patterns that exactly mimic where the multi-thinger believes in coincident objects. So I'm just co-reference just goes proxy for coincident objects. And so all the action is in the semantics and not in the metaphysics. So you don't have to believe the weird, like I just don't believe two things are in the same place at the same time. I personally think that's incompatible with physicalism. And all these multi-thingers walking around don't think they're violating physicalism. I think they are. There's one pile of matter, there's one thing. Is this helping?
Yeah, 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 yes. So assume that you're a sculptor and in your studio or atelier, there is a beautiful piece of marble for a long time, and I'm visiting you and I'm always admiring to this piece of marble. And one day I come to visit you and there is no more piece of marble. And then I ask you, where is that beautiful piece of marble? And so you turn it into a sculpture in the meantime. What would be your answer?
Um,
It is this thing here.
I might say that. It depends how much of the marble I chipped away in making the statue. If I chipped half of it away, I would be reluctant to say that it's the same hunk of marble. The case I was thinking about with the clay, the artist has the lump of clay and doesn't get rid of any clay.
Okay,
He just changes the shape.
okay,
And I want to go, the lump of clay is still there, it just changed its shape. So if in that case, if you ask, I go, it's right here, I formed it into a statue. In the marble case, it's a little bit weirder because you have to chip the marble
okay.
away.
Go to the clay example. What would be your answer?
But
Where is
I
the beautiful chunk of clay?
so I would just point at the statue and go, it's right here. I made a statue out of it.
So it's right here.
Wouldn't you want to say that?
Oh, yes.
Would you say that the lump of clay disappeared when I changed its shape?
No, nobody wants to say that.
I wouldn't either. But if I then smash the statue and roll it back into just a ball, I would say that the statue is gone. Disappeared is a weird way to put it, maybe, but um, the statue doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I
So,
think that's just a normal way of talking. And if you're a 3D one thinger, you're like, it's kind of a half truth, but that's how we think about it, right? The object that was the statue still exists. The hunk of matter that was the statue still exists, but the statue doesn't exist.
okay, so your picture of meaning and reference and property and thing, do you have any other example where your view fits well?
Yeah, I mean, take the name boron. Like that is referring right now to a completely different hunk of matter that it referred to when you were 6 years old, right?
Yes.
Uh, so if you're a materialist, and I think that requires us to be one thingers, then like it looks like you have to say, it looks like boron's a different person from what like you didn't exist yesterday, or you certainly didn't exist when you were 6 years old or something like that. And the theory is trying to save us to be able to be materialists about humans. Like you're just a bunch of matter, um, but without giving up the intuitive way we talk, right? Boron just, as time goes on, just shifts and refers to different hunks of matter. It referred to a completely different hunk of matter when you were six, and it just at every moment, I mean, our matter is changing constantly. It's just the referent is changing at every instant. And it's doing it in a principled way. It's following the property being a human being.
Okay, Justin.
Well, just to follow up on that, so and to follow up on something you said earlier, Mark, about you're trying to do the what the metaphysics does without the heavy lifting of the metaphysics with the semantic theory. And so one of the things that you reference a lot, and also is relevant to your answer to Bourne, it has to do with this continuity property or continuity relation. And I just wonder, like, how much metaphysics is smuggled into that continuity relation? Like, what do you mean by that continuity relation? What is it? So is it just adjacent time slices sharing the same property, or is there something more
That's
than
how that's how a four-dimensionalist would put it, right? So four-dimensionalists are the people that talk about these relations, right? And so you've got an adjacent time slice sharing the same property. So if you're a four-dimensionalist, um, then you're going to think that boron, well, let's switch the example of someone who's dead. So Kennedy, born in 1917, died in 1963, and he's a worm through space-time. And what are the hunks of matter that connect that? Well, they're connected by the human being continuity relation. Each one is a human being, but like Jackie's right over here being a human being. Why is she not? And like, oh, because it's not, it's like it has to do with like overlap of the matter, like significant overlap of the matter, not 100%, but significant. And you spell it out and then you go, okay, got it. The human being continuity relation. And so what I'm doing is stealing that and going, If we're just talking about at a very precise moment, both hunks of matter exist, right? They're not, don't think of them as time slices. Just think of them as like, here's the one hunk of matter that's boron now, and then the one before was like a that right now, the old hunk is most of that matter plus like some particles that are just off of him, like have been separated from him. And those two hunks of matter are human being continuity related because one was a human being and the other one is a human being and overlap and all that stuff. So it's like you have to be careful. Um, you have to be careful to make to not make it a cross-time relation if you want to say that it's literally true. Um, but since we're talking about in an instant, I think we'll be able to do it. And then when you get across large stretches of time, I'm less confident then. I'm like, oh, we can just be an error theorist about that. But for this theory to work, you just need it to hold like in the instant. Is that making sense?
Yeah, so a lot of work is being done by the overlap of the material from which the object is made, right? Because if at one instant we changed all the cells,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
then presumably the continuity relation wouldn't hold.
Yeah. And I think like um there's you could stipulate it's got to be like significant overlap. I think like there are weird cases where we want to say, oh, maybe it's like the way we use the word same. If we're wanting this to capture the way we use same across time. So imagine a restaurant burns down and then they rebuild it immediately. They just like clear it off and rebuild it. And like 3 months later, they reopen. And a lot of us want to go, yeah, it's the same restaurant, like in some sense. And you're like, there's no overlap. And you're like, so if you want to get it perfect, you might have to talk about weird cases, but like those are weird cases. In the normal case, there's going to be significant overlap, like 99.9% overlap. Like the matter that makes up you right now compared to now is like way more than 99%. But yeah, I think like to make this work seamlessly with the way we think about sameness across time, you have to think of some other cases where there's less significant overlap.
Well, Philip, help me and correct me if I'm wrong. I think the Stoics, they had the view that thing is not identical to the matter, but thing is identical to the unique set of properties. Uh, if that is so, what does it show about the lump statue?
I mean, Aristotle for sure thought that too.
It it shows that actually one thing disappears and another comes into existence. Or Filip, Filip uključi zvučnik. We cannot hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. But in the last analysis, Stoics were also one fingers. They were accused of being two fingers because there are two things in the same place at the same time. But they answered that they were just talking about properties of this one and the same thing. So they were one fingers, and Aristotle was also one finger. So
Really? But didn't
yeah.
Aristotle
because the
the
form
matter
of the
and the
thing.
form?
Yes, but form is not a part of the thing, and it is not something different than the thing itself, but form is the thing itself. So I wouldn't say that Aristotle was a two-thinger. No, no. There
So
are people who want to argue that that form is one thing and matter another thing, but no, well, every physical thing is just, well, it is a form or it is a matter. It depends on the way in which you describe it, but it's a one thing.
okay, so I'm not even close to an Aristotle scholar, so I'm not going to argue with you, but I just want to clarify. because Aristotle also believed in essential properties. So the current
Right.
day Aristotelians, like people like Kit Fine, um, are definitely multi-thingers and they're definitely essentialists. And so they think like, oh, the difference between lumpy and statchy is that statchy has the property, its shape property essentially, and lumpy has being a lump of clay essentially, but doesn't have its shape essentially. And and people like Kit Fine and Karen Bennett, um, Megan Fairchild, these people all have this sort of plenitude view that like any possible way of distributing essentialness over the properties of the thing, there's an object that does. Um, so here's my question for you about Aristotle. Did he think like, look, there's just one object here, and it's got the property being a phone essentially, and it doesn't have being green essentially, and there's no object that has the property being green essentially. There's just no such thing. Is that Aristotle's
Correct.
view?
Yeah, 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 yeah. That is Aristotle's view. But
I don't know
well,
which view is weirder.
well,
Like he doesn't have the weirdness of multi-thingism, but just like this, to me, it seems like this arbitrary, it just happens to line up with what we care about the object, which properties are essential.
yes, I agree. Yeah, that's true.
Just a terminological clarification. Uh, one finger, two finger, where belongs somebody who believes that first we have one thing and then we have another thing. We do not have two things at the same time.
I
Is
mean,
it
I think that's
finger
one
or
thing.
two finger?
If I'm understanding what you mean, I
Well,
think
if we
one
have one thing, lump, then we have another thing, sculpture. Is that guy one finger or two finger?
that sounds like a one thinger. That sounds kind of like the Aristotle view. Its essential property was being a lump of clay, and then we formed it into a statue, and it stopped having, or maybe it disappeared and a new object appeared, namely the statue. I don't know. To me, this view that Philip is saying is Aristotle's view, and I believe him because I don't know Aristotle, sounds really weird. It has
Well,
objects appearing and reappearing.
you should distinguish between Aristotle and contemporary Aristotelians, but being a statue is not a property of matter, of a clay. It's just its form. And in that sense, a lump of clay is the statue. So the statue is not a property because, well, I think this is the problem for Aristotle himself. Lump of clay is the statue. Statue is, well, it's not being a statue. It's not its property, and it
Okay,
is contemporary Aristotelians who speaks of properties.
yeah, okay. So I understand the contemporary people. They avoid all the problems of arbitrariness and anthropocentrism and objects. Well, they avoid all of that by having the plenitude view. But take Boron's question. So we've got this lump of clay, and it's not a statue. It was just formed in a lump factory. And on the Aristotelian view, it's presumably got the property being a lump of clay essentially, or it's the form is lump of clay.
Okay, a form of lump of clay. You're right.
The form is lump of clay. Then the artist comes along and changes the shape, and now the form is statue, and
Mm-hmm.
the form is no longer a lump of clay.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to say um, the lump of clay disappeared and a new object came into being? Or do we want to say that the form of a thing can change? Like which view is
Right,
Aristotle's?
it can change.
The form
The,
changed.
the form the form changed. The form changed. Right. Yeah.
And what is the
Well, he wouldn't say that one thing disappeared and another pop up. This is definitely not Harris. No, the form just changed. When making things, you just change its form. So when you're
and does that, but he wouldn't say the essential property changed? That would be
no,
weird. Does
no.
he even use, but people think of him as an essentialist, right? Or am I wrong?
Well, well, yes, he is. Yeah, but I would say in a different sense of in a different context, right? In a different context, when he's doing, I don't know, when he's doing logic, but not when he's doing a metaphysics of physical things or the analysis of physical things. Then not. No.
Okay.
I have one very general comment. It seems to me that there's a discussion. There is the standard package that four-dimensionalism includes this possibility of overlapping objects. In my opinion, these are two different and distinct intuitions that have different sources. As far as I can say, I was trying to dig it out. I don't know whether I was successful or not. This four-dimensional worm, okay, here the motive is, let's say, science. On the other hand, this idea that there can be overlapping objects, as far as I can say, it comes from the mereology. And they had the idea that one element can be element of several wholes. And that's the source of this crazy claim that different objects can coincide or that they can share temporal parts or something.
Okay, so
it's actually mereology, and mereology is done for different purposes. It's just not about the physical world.
okay, so I want to try to zero in on the crazy in these two views, right? Because I agree that four-dimensionalism and multi-thingism are crazy, but they're crazy in different ways. Multi-thingism endorses the existence of two things being in the same place at the same time. Like there's one hunk of matter here, and there's two things. There's the phone and the matter, and they're different objects. That strikes me as crazy. Four-dimensionalism, I think, doesn't actually commit to that kind of crazy.
Yeah.
The only kind of crazy that four-dimensionalism commits to is eternalism, right? So eternalism is the view that past, present, and future all exist, right? So the Battle of Hastings exists as in the exact same way that our Zoom conversation exists. It's just an event happening in a region of space-time. We happen not to be there. So there's also an event happening right now in Paris that we're not a part of. And the Battle of Hastings is just like that. It's just a plot. Now, you might be like, that doesn't sound crazy to me. And if so, I think then your four-dimensionalism isn't crazy. But that's the only kind of crazy in four-dimensionalism. Because once you have that view, you go, look, all we're doing now with four-dimensional objects is just carving the four-dimensional universe into different chunks, right? So just like a three-dimensional, it's like if we're in a sandbox, like I can carve out and go, here's one little pile of sand. You go, here's another one. Like, look, they overlap. This bunch of sand is part of both bunches of sand. And that's all the four-dimensionalist is doing, right? So they go, look, Stachy is this lump and Lumpy's this one. Stachy is just a part of Lumpy. And they're different things because one's a proper part of the other. It's like my arm and my body. That's all. Once you have that the past and the future are real, that's the only metaphysically weird thing. Now they're just carving reality into different chunks of matter, right? And so the overlapping parts are it's just like overlapping piles of sand, right? Like think of this. Think of the part of my body that's all of me except for my left arm, right? Now think of the part of me that's all of me except for my right arm. Those are just two different, that's not metaphysically weird, right? That's just two different chunks of matter and they share a part, namely my head. So I don't think that's weird. If you think that's weird, okay. I think the weird thing in four-dimensionalism is just believing in past and future objects and believing the Battle of Hastings is there, just in a different region.
That is definitely weird, but it's not maybe relevant to this discussion. What is weird that, say, 50 roads can share one and the same patch of asphalt? That is weird.
I don't think that's any weirder than do you think it's weird? So let's give names to these two things, lefty and righty. Lefty is all of me except for my right arm, and righty is all of me except for my left arm. Lefty and righty share, my head is part of lefty and righty and me. Like,
Well,
does that,
there are no, it is arbitrary undetached parts or something. Well, okay.
yeah, that's,
Then,
but that's the mereological universalist view that you can just like carve out chunks of reality. And like maybe you don't, if you maybe you think mereological universalism is weird. It doesn't seem weird to me. It seems like, oh, that's just a bunch of matter. Let's give it a name.
oh, well, it can be weird, definitely. Well, that one and the same part can be part of the many wholes, principle infinite in many wholes. It's,
Do you think it's weird to talk about my arm and me, my left arm and me as different things?
uh, okay, take for instance your car's fuel pump. Can your car share its fuel pump with another car? No.
No, it can't. But that's different. That's a different kind of sharing, right? My
Yeah, that is literal sharing.
my but my me, my whole body and my left arm can share my hand. My hand is a part of my arm and it's also a part of me. That's not weird. I mean, I don't like
Well, there is
we're
something.
throwing this word weird around. Like it doesn't seem weird to me.
Well, there is something unnatural in such objects.
Well, isn't the point though that Mark is not asserting that that's an object, right? On Mark's view, what we're doing is this is just a way of basically just a way of referring, talking, right? There's no metaphysical, separate metaphysical thing corresponding to um, these multiple ways of talking about the same thing. That's what makes him a one thinger, right? So I feel like yeah, we do talk in the way that Mark thinks is a normal way to talk. And Boren, you're right. It'd be weird to think that we can actually carve up, though there's these 17 million things which correspond to the 17 million ways we can carve up Mark's body, on Mark's body. But I feel like when Mark's not really committed to the weird part of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I guess what's weird for one person isn't necessarily weird for another. Some people think parts and wholes are already weird. I mean, I guess if I put my mereology hat on, I can get into the mood of thinking parts and wholes are weird. But for the purpose of this paper, I was assuming like there's no problem with talking about my car and the fuel pump. Those are two different things, and one's a part of the other. That I wasn't trying to say let's avoid talking about my car and the pump as different things. What I was trying to do is avoid talking about my car and another thing that shares the exact same matter, not a proper part, but the car and all of the matter in the car. And as those are different things, that's what seems weird to me. Um, but maybe, so I wasn't trying to avoid committing to object wholes and parts. I was trying to avoid committing to two different wholes, two different things that are made of the same parts that are distinct. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's okay. But what typical four-dimensional solution to this statue lamp problem is that we have two coinciding things that share parts, temporal parts. That would be
Yeah, but it's not. So let's just go to the road case because Route 66 goes from Chicago to LA. It's a one continuous road from Chicago to LA. And in LA, there's a street called Santa Monica Boulevard that is it's part of Route 66.
yeah. Do we have two roads?
Yeah, but there's one bunch of asphalt and there's two different roads, Santa Monica Boulevard and Route 66, and they're not the same. They're numerically distinct. Why is that? Because Santa Monica Boulevard is just a part of Route 66. It's not, that's it. Like, why is that weird?
Oh, it is weird if you say that you have two roads. Then it's just simply false.
Well, one road goes from LA to Chicago, and one road goes from the east side of LA to the west side of LA.
Okay. And that is one and
It's the same asphalt. One's just a part of the other. It's just like my arm and me.
well, then you are not talking about roads as physical objects, you are talking about, I don't know, distances or directions or.
I don't know. Do you think that my arm exists?
Hmm?
Is my do you think my left arm exists? Is that a real thing?
Yeah,
You think I exist? Am I a real thing? Do you think my arm is identical to me?
no.
Well, then what's the difference between that and the roads?
It is part of you, but
Yeah, but Santa Monica Boulevard is part of.
no, 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 no. In the case of roads, what they claim is that there are two roads coinciding. They do not claim that the Santa Monica Boulevard is part of Road
No,
66. That would make sense. That would be okay.
no, I think that is their view.
Huh?
Like here, right here, the thing that is weirding you out is like if you think that my arm exists and you think I exist, you have to go, this is me and my arm, and those are distinct things, right?
No, no, no. That example is, I would say, too good for the claim of coinciding objects or objects sharing parts. Oh, okay. Any more questions, comments? Hey, Mattia.
Yeah, hi, Mark. This was really interesting. And I'm thinking about the following example, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So I'm wondering if you can help me out a little bit. Um, so when we talk about hunks of matter, right, how would you define a singular hunk of matter in your terms?
I don't have a definition ready to hand. I was hoping it was intuitive. It's just um go back to the sandbox, like pick up one hunk. That's just some sand, right? That's a hunk. Pick up another one. Like
Hmm.
that's like the idea is the universe is just a big fat pile of matter, and you can just grab hunks of it.
Okay. So
Matter. Yeah.
And like, can we understand a one person, for instance, I know you, Mark, or me, Mattia, to constitute a particular hunk of matter? Or
On the view I'm going for, like right now, I just am a hunk of matter.
okay,
Nothing but matter here.
okay. And I was thinking about an example of conjoined twins, right? So imagine conjoined twins. I know they share the same torso or whatever, but they have two different heads. Again, I'm not big into medicine, but I think this is in principle possible, right? Um, so in that case, I'm just trying to clarify my thoughts. Are we talking about the same hunk of matter, or so it's two
So it's like
different?
this. I think that's identical to what I was just saying with lefty and righty. So here's a hunk of matter, all of me except for this arm. Here's
Mhm.
a hunk of matter, all of me except for this arm. Those are two different hunks of matter and they share a part. Like my head is a part of both of those hunks of matter. So the idea is you can just like, it's a mereological universalist view. You can just carve up the matter however you want.
Okay, okay. I'm gonna think about this a little bit more. And another just way more quicker explanatory question. How do we, maybe you have mentioned this and I just completely lost it, so I'm sorry in advance, but how do we identify which property is the keep referring property of an entity? If you can just spell it out for me.
Yeah, it's convention. So
Okay.
built into the it's built into the way we name people that the keep referring property as being a human being. It's built into the way we refer name cats, sorry, the way we name cats that the keep referring property as being a cat. It's
Mhm.
built into the way we name buildings that the keep referring property as being a building. Like the Empire State Building
Mhm.
refers to the building. Works of art, it's the statue or the painting. That's the property.
Mhm.
So usually it's like very like people name their cars. So being a car is the property. It's just how we are thinking of the object, how the baptizer is thinking of the object, and how the community is thinking of the object. So it's sort of like it goes piggybacking a little bit like the multi-thing would be like the essential property. We're doing the property that's essential. And it's like, in a way, it's like, oh, the one we take to be essential. We're sort of thinking it was like, that's the main property. It's just, but instead of it being like this heavy duty, like essential property thing, it's just like, that's how we're thinking of it.
Mm.
So it's
Okay.
just, and
Mm.
then it's like lumpy. That's a weird case. It's because, if you point at a clay statue and go lumpy, people are going to think you're naming the statue. So in a philosophy paper, you have to go, lumpy is the name of the lump of clay. And then we go, oh, got it.
Mm. Okay.
So in the cases that aren't just like normal cases of naming a building or a person or a cat, you have to help your hearer along by telling them what you're naming.
Mm. Okay.
We normally don't do that because most names, it's just completely infused into the culture that when you name a newborn baby, you're naming the person and not like some weird, like the hunk of matter or something.
Mm.
So, Mark, sorry, once again, this is your example of lefty and righty that share the head. Peter Van Inwagen has that article, there are no undetached arbitrary parts. So he would say, no, there is no lefty and righty that share head, they just don't exist.
Yeah. And I personally, I don't really have a beef with that. Like, I can get weirded out by mereology. In this paper, I was assuming that we can just grab hunks of matter arbitrarily. So it's like basically assuming a mereological universalist view. But I think this, if you were like, I don't like that, I'd be like, okay, we can adjust this and just talk about like simples and collections of simples or something. I'd have to think it through, but I don't think I'm committed to undetached parts in some deep way. I was committing to that to make it easy to say the theory.
Okay. Any more further questions, comments? Where did Mark go wrong?
Nowhere.
No.
I do I do think your view is actually it has intuitive um, appeal.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like the point about physicalism and being compatible with physicalism is part of its appeal too. So I know you're trying to save these kinds of intuitions that people have, but like if you asked ordinary people, you know, about Lumpy and Stachy, I think they they would be weirded out by the idea that there are multiple
I agree.
objects really there. So I think you have intuitions on your side.
I agree. Like I think when you give people the statchy, lumpy case and try to push them toward multi-thingism, a very normal reaction that I've noticed in people is like, this is some kind of trick. This is you're playing with words and this is a trick. And like I think they're right. I think philosophers too often like bulldoze over their initial feeling that that was a trick and then they start believing these weird theories.
My favorite example is the actual example. There was a guy in Rijeka, he had this Volkswagen, we call it bug. It's a beetle, I think, in English. And he rearranged that car, he turned it into the airplane. And guy was flying around. So you see small, fat, white airplane drives around and you can hear the sound of Volkswagen engine, this air-cooled engine. Is it the same thing? I don't know. It's a different category. It's not car anymore. Now it's airplane. Material is the same. Engine is the same. Is it the same thing? I don't know what to say about it. But it was fun seeing it and hearing it flying around. And it flew quite well. So,
Yeah. I mean, it was probably not exactly the same parts, right?
yeah, he had something, I guess.
Had to add some wings, right?
No, he used the metal to bring to build wings or something. He used a lot of material.
Huh.
It's okay, but there is somewhere the first half, you have a reference rule. Reference rule. So there is H1, H2. So what's the point? That name goes from object to object, or
Goes from pile of matter to pile of matter following the property around, right? So like in the case of Kennedy, like the property being a human being is attached to a baby, and then the property being a human being like drifts to different hunks of matter, right? So a different hunk of matter, in 1960 when he won the election, it was a different hunk of matter that had the property being a human being than the hunk that was a baby. And the theory is just like the name just goes with the that goes with the property. It doesn't refer to the property. It refers to the current hunk of matter, but it follows the property around. As the property drifts to different hunks of matter, the name goes with it. That's just what reference rule says.
it follows the property?
Yeah. It keeps referring to the new hunk of matter that has the keep referring property.
And if I understand this correctly, like your theory is not intended to solve problems like what does it mean to be a person, same person over time? Or like that's not a kind of problem that this particular theory has to solve. Um, because presumably your answer is going to be something like, well, whatever the convention for reference is going to be the thing that ends up settling something like personal identity over time type problems. And maybe we need a theory that informs our convention, right? But am I right? You sort of you're passing the buck on those, right? And that's I don't think it's a problem for your view. I just want to I
Yeah,
think
no,
it's
I
just that's
think
the
I'm
scope.
assuming, I think the right way to think of this is that the paper assumes that we've got some solution to that puzzle. And
Mhm.
the name tracks the way the solution works. I think
Right.
that the right thing to say about this is that uh, here's my view. The problem of personal identity and sameness of person across time is ultimately convention. It's just how we use same person. Um, we haven't fully decided everything. We've decided it for like 99.9% of the cases where it's like, I'm the same person that I was a second ago. And names work that way. And then there are these weird cases that metaphysicians think of fusion and fission and shit like this. And the right thing to say is like, oh, we don't really know what to do in those cases. We haven't decided. And so like we have to just stipulate like the name will just like the theory will like stop and go shit. Well, you guys decide whether this is the same person or not, and then we'll decide if the name goes with it. That's the sort of this theory of reference goes piggyback on a view of sameness of time, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was what I was thinking. Yeah,
Yeah.
about your view.
So what would your theory say about the Volkswagen Beetle car and airplane? That it is the same thing with different properties. Then we are not catching the same thing, or no? What?
I mean, I think that I would need to hear more details about what exactly he did with the matter, but I kind of feel like this is like a case that I was just talking about to Justin of like these weird fusion fission cases where it's like we haven't, my view is like convention settles it. Like, and then if you hit a case where convention doesn't know what to do, the theory says, well, we don't know what to do. Decide what you want and then, right? So is it the same thing? Like, it's so weird that we just haven't decided, right? Like, you've got this Volkswagen, we call it Herbie. And then you take the exact same parts and just mush them around, and now you're flying. Is this still Herbie? I guess I want to go. Most people would probably say, yeah, it's still the same thing. And you change it into a plane, and like the keep referring property was being a car, and like, but it's just a weird case that's so weird that's like, oh, the theory doesn't say anything about this.
Any more questions, comments? Andrei, Philip, you
Uh,
don't have to say anything.
well, I may have a clarification question. I think that you said that, well, suppose that Lumpy is identical to Stetchy in, say, T1, and then So what you said really is that names do not really behave like definite descriptions, but that the semantic values are the objects. It's what they bring into the meaning of the sentence. So suppose that it's true that a lump of clay is being formed into is formed into a statue, and so lumpy is the same as statue. So lumpy refers to the same hunk of matter as statue. So uh, what they bring into the sentence is that very same hunk of matter or not. But then again, I'm not quite sure if I got you right. I mean, you said that the analysis of that sentence should be something like there is a referent of lumpy at T1 and there is a referent of statue at the same moment and they coincide. So it it seems to me that you're kind of offering something like a meta-linguistical analysis of something which looks like an ordinary identity claim, and that lumpy and statue are really bringing in something like a quantificational structure to the meaning of the sentence, and that in that sense they resemble more definite descriptions than what we would normally call names.
Well, that's for past tense. If the sentence is present tense, it doesn't have to be metalinguistic at all, right? It's just the object can go in. And to be clear, I didn't say this, but the theory doesn't entail direct reference theory. It's just compatible with it. So if you want to be a description theorist, you can be. Um, but where it feels more metalinguistic is in the past, when you go to the past tense sentence and you're like, oh, when we say that Lumpy was in my dining room yesterday, what we're saying is there was a referent of Lumpy in my dining room yesterday. And I hesitate to say that that's what it says. That I think is the truth condition. Um, so maybe you call that metalinguistic. If so, I'm fine with that. But that's only true in the past tense case. In the present tense case, it can be non-metalinguistic and straightforwardly directly referential. Um, uh, I in the past tense case, it still can be directly referential, but it's going to be within a past tense operator. So the idea is that if you say Aristotle was a philosopher, that whole thing is going to be on this reading is going to be within a past tense operator. And then you're going to go find the referent of Aristotle back then, of our word Aristotle back then. And you can still be the direct reference here in that you then put that referent into the proposition express, but it's going to be within a past tense operator. And the metalinguisticness is about finding the referent. That doesn't need to go into the proposition expressed.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we already exceeded time. Mark, thank you. Justin, we'll see you in a couple of days, right?